Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this paper on Coastal Crossroads HD-1 site at Ras Al Had, Sultanate of Oman. My name is Mark Kenoyer, and I'm presenting on behalf of my co-authors, Dennys Frenez and Maurizio Cattani. We are members of the Joint HAD project, the University of Bologna, University of Wisconsin-Madison, under the auspices of the Ministry of Heritage and Tourism, Sultanate of Oman. We especially want to thank the ministry for all of their support and permissions to work at the site. We also want to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Italy and also the Embassy of Italy in Muscat, as well as our universities who have helped to sponsor different parts of the project. I also want to especially thank all of the colleagues who have worked on this project for the last 4 years, both from Bologna, from Madison, and including students, and also special thanks to Khamis bin Nasser al-Amri, the local superintendent who's in charge of the sites in this area. The site HD-1 is located on a very important point of Oman, which is the easternmost point of Oman, jutting out into the Gulf of Oman and linking to the coasts of Iran and Pakistan, as well as Gujarat. The site is located on a small lagoon called Khor Hajar, which is most people think is not that important, but actually there's a large settlement here at Ras Al Had. There's also Khor Grama, which is a much larger body of water, and there's also a settlement over here. This site was discovered in the 1980s and excavated by the British Museum. It appears to have been a small coastal settlement where ships were unloaded. They would be coming through the entrance to the Khor and then beach and low tide, as the boats still do today, and then bring materials up into the site. And as you can see from the contours of the site here, which I'll explain a bit more later, we think that maybe there might have been a projection of the lagoon in a channel that allowed boats to come up very much closer to the site than today. So today they're way out here, and in the past it might have been in a bit closer. The excavations by the British Museum in 1986 discovered large amounts of Indus pottery, which was one of the main reasons why I was interested in coming to the site. They also had evidence for copper fishhooks, some with fiber, which also is an interest of mine. And they had some stone beads, which included carnelian beads, which also is one of the important interests that relate to trade with the Indus Valley. Studies of the pottery by Sophie Méry has shown that the large black storage jars, which we call black slip jars from the Indus, could be identified. The ones found from HD-1 could be associated with the southern group of pottery from Pakistan, which is associated with Mohenjo-daro, or the southern part of Sindh. So this was also another reason why we wanted to come, to get more examples of this pottery and also do some analysis of residue analysis from these vessels. So overall, the major goals were to define the overall site size, stratigraphic features, as well as paleoenvironment and chronology, to investigate the nature of habitation, study a bit more about the craft technologies, subsistence, and especially the trade connections and seasonality. And we did this by conducting scientific documentation of newly recovered artifacts, including faunal and floral remains, which are being studied currently. We also wanted to determine where the lagoon may have been located to better understand the positioning of the site. And one of the last but most important reasons to excavate here was to demonstrate to the local authorities and the people in Ras Al Had that the site is very important, and we need to protect it from encroachment and destruction during this period of development of this region for tourism. This is a result of our 4 years of research showing the different trenches that we excavated in the north, the east, the west, and the south. And we've been able to determine the overall topography of the natural surface. So we can see that there is a depression in between the two mounds, where there were no habitation area there, and it appears to have been possibly this channel. And we also can see that the overall plain level is quite horizontal here, except for where you have beach rock at the edge here. So there may have been some projection here that also helped the buildup of sand and the protection of this area. In the area between the two mounds, the higher mound on the east and the lower mound on the west, we found no evidence for hearths or structures or features. And the sediments here look very much like the sediments that we were able to test in the lagoon. We have a clean sandy layer at the very bottom. We have a reduced anaerobic level here. And then we have a reddish oxidized layer at the top. These later deposits here are the result of redeposition of material from the top of the mound coming down. And here is an example from the lagoon where we have the oxidized layers at the edge of the beach, and then a bit yellower material, and then your anaerobic levels, which are part of the lagoon that gets inundated every high tide. So this similarity suggests that maybe the lagoon was actually stretching up all the way to the edge of the site. Over the 4 years, our excavations have been able to recover a large amount of materials, including very small objects such as these beads, and we sifted all of the material and were able to recover lots of micro fauna and fish bones that are currently being studied. We have local assistants helping, as well as students from both universities and our own team members. And this is what's allowed us to really get a new perspective on what was happening at this settlement. One area that Professor Cattani was excavating shows the presence of lots of crucible fragments. And we've found several crucible fragments on the site before, but these ones are very special, and we'll talk about them in a minute. And you can see here that the natural soil is reached through step trenches because these sections are very fragile and collapse. So we have to be very careful when we're excavating in this kind of sand dune-like material. We also did a cross-section between the two mounds, a transect, that was stimulated in part because the Khamis al-Amri had dug a trench here to keep local people from driving over the site. So we extended in areas small test trenches to document the stratigraphy. This helped us connect the two areas. In that long trench, in each of the test trenches, we were able to find numerous hearths, which unfortunately did not have any floral remains. We did flotation, but we couldn't recover anything, and no good charcoal, except just dusty black powder. But we did get bones from porpoises, which we are trying to date to see if we can get some kind of usable radiocarbon date from the hearths, because the hearths are sequentially spaced going out into the plain, and it'll help us understand how during different periods people were interacting in this area. On the top of the mound, we found no structures, no buildings, no walls, no rectangular buildings from the prehistoric period, but we did find some large circular hearths, which probably had this windbreak. This is one with an apparent windbreak around it. And in this hearth, we also found almost the entire vertebra of a porpoise that was heavily charred. This has been studied and will be reported by Elena Maini, but basically it looks like they were either smoking this, or maybe this was a dried carcass that they were actually burning as a form of fuel, but it was left here, and we're fortunate enough to be able to recover the whole thing. The overall site is the highest part is about 2.4 meters thick, and it's basically seasonal occupations of hearths made of rocks and rubble, and then sand building up around it. And this repeated occupation resulted in eventually this buildup of 2.4 meters. It's possible that the site was only occupied in certain seasons, and the most likely ones were before or after the summer monsoon, or possibly in the winter. And fish studies being done by Bill Belcher will be able to provide more specific seasonality. The dating of the site can be confirmed as belonging to the Oman period, 2700 to 2000 BC. We do have a bead on the surface that might be from the Wadi Suk period a bit later. And there is one charcoal sample going to 2900, so it may go to the Hafit period, but we did not find any early pottery or late pottery. We only found Umanar materials in this deposit. The pottery that we found, as I mentioned, we have a lot of Umanar pottery. locally made in Oman, but we also have pottery that was clearly made in the Indus, including the large black slip jars, which we assume were used for shipping goods, as well as materials used for serving and presentation, dish on stands, and small containers for water, as well as perforated vessels that might have been used for making beer or some other beverage. We only have one Indus cooking pot, and that was found this last season, and it's still being processed for neutron activation analysis. Overall, we have 38% of the pottery is Indus pottery, but the differences between locations show that there's a lot more Indus pottery in the low areas next to where this lagoon possible extension is, compared to the interior part of the site. So interior site has 38%. The lower areas near the edge of the lagoon would have 57%. And many of these are from large black slip jars. Now, black slip jars are very important because they could provide evidence for commodities being traded from the Indus. And being located right on the beach means they came right off the boat and were either broken in transshipment or broken there when they were offloaded and the sherds were left at that location. So Arvind Mathur, one of my graduate students, is collecting sherds here, as well as the sediments around them for eventual residue analysis. Black slip jars in the Indus cannot be used for residue analysis because they were reused many, many times for different activities, and in most cases the final use was to be used as a commode in a latrine, and we're not interested so much in trying to understand what Harappan feces was like. We can imagine that it's very complicated. We want to know what was being traded in vessels from the Indus to areas like Oman. In the last days of Greg Jameson's visit last year, he was walking on the site. We were doing a surface survey here, and he found evidence. He found a pot sherd, which had red slip and black painted design, even though it was partly eroded. And I immediately could identify this as being Indus. He was very excited, and we decided to excavate this area. So after getting permission, because this is actually an Islamic cemetery, we did small narrow trenches in between the graves, and we were able to find the other parts of that pot in lower layers. So this is another fragment of it. We found a third fragment, and when we put them together, this is the one found from the surface. These are from the excavation. It turns into a vessel, Harappan vessel, with red slip and 2 painted script signs. Now, this is actually very, very important because in the entire Indus Valley, there are only 25 other painted script examples from all the sites that I've studied. So our sample from Oman is now the 26th, and we have painted a bangle and we have a painted steatite seal, but this means that painted signs on pottery is quite rare, and finding one in Oman, I think, is important, and we are going to investigate this in further research. The other thing that we've done with the pottery from Ras Al Had is do neutron activation on a large number of samples. And some of these we intentionally selected as being local, and some of them we thought might be Indus, but they turned out to be local. Others that we thought were Indus were local, but we have a lot of Indus pottery at HD-1. And this Indus pottery at HD-1 is primarily the black slip jars and other diagnostic vessels, and the clays all group with the southern Indus Mohenjo-daro clay groups. There are other ones in between that might be from Gujarat, because the Gujarat clays and Oman clays tend to overlap. And we're still working on how to differentiate this with petrography, and Sophie Méry is working on that with us. Copper fish hooks, it's an obvious type of artifact found in a fishing site, and there are lots of hooks and lots of rods that were used to make hooks and probably for other activities as well. And these are found in different proportions in different parts of the site, but they are very abundant in all of the excavation areas. In fact, 61% of the artifacts in copper are belonging to hooks or rods. The other important point, however, is that a lot of them are broken. So you can imagine if you're fishing and you catch fish some of these hooks might break. They may be stuck in the fish. The local fisher folk collected all of those broken hooks and they recycled them, and I think that they were using these fragments as a part of a recycling mechanism for and processing copper, and that's what these large crucibles might have been involved in. The large crucible we found in 2018 actually fits, the size is exactly the same as the large ingot found by the British team, and that ingot would have fit exactly into that crucible. So it's possible that this crucible is actually a mold and that this was used for casting large ingots, and that may be one of the activities that was going on in the site. We do have some fragments of ore, very, very small pieces, but we also have ground up powdered materials that are identical to these ore pieces, and it's possible that these small fragments were mainly used for pigment and not for metal smelting itself. The other feature of copper objects is that they often preserve fibers, and the British team noted that, but they never published details on it. So we were able to collect many examples of fiber preserved on copper, as well as one preserved inside of a steatite bead. And I've analyzed these fibers, comparing them to corroded fibers on other materials, as well as modern fibers, using the scanning electron microscope. And we can identify palm fiber used to wrap some scrap pieces of metal. So they were collecting scrap pieces and wrapping it up. And this is clearly palm fiber based on the cell structure of the fibers. Two palms that might have been available are the Mazzari palm and the date palm. Some of these fibers were actually woven. So this is an example of a woven textile found on a piece of copper. And by the comparisons based on my studies, I suggest this might have been jute, but there might also be a mixture of jute and palm fiber together. We have other fibers that possibly are palm that may have been processed for fishing line. So if you're using fishing line, you have to make it strong enough to withstand tension. And fiber is often treated with lime to help it be more resilient. And this is called mercerizing. And these fibers may have been modified through the lime processing. So I need to do a bit more study on that experimentally. We do have some examples of cotton that was clearly used for fishing line. And here's an example found in 2016. We also have cotton fiber found inside of a steatite bead, which is one of the most important discoveries from the early excavations. These excavations, and it shows the use of fiber. This is the earliest fiber of cotton found in Oman. The question is whether it's Arabian cotton, which is derived from a different species, Herbaceum, or a species from South Asia, which is Arboreum. So this is the two different species, and we know that Gossypium was found at Mehrgarh in Pakistan at about 5000 BC, and fibers of possibly wild cotton were found even earlier at 7000. The steatite the flint tools that were used at the site come from two different source areas, one Ras Al Jins, the other one in the highlands of the edge of the Al Hajar Mountains, and possibly further to the north at Wadi Shab we have evidence of other darker cherts. These chert tools were used for processing shell, drilling and boring and pecking and abrasion, and we have also different types of chert tools with retouch that were used for possibly woodworking. We also have clear indication that there are different patterns of chert accumulations in different parts of the site. So we're in the process now of analyzing these patterns to better understand different craft activities in different parts of the excavation. Tiny perçoirs and drills were also found. These might have been used for drilling shell. We found traces of calcium carbonate at the tip here, which may be from the shell. And we also have it on large tools, which probably are used for making the conus rings. We also have a perforated pearl, which also would have been perforated using one of these tiny little tools, and a ring of pinctada. Some very small objects that might have been used for fishing, such as this is a lure made from pinctada, and it could have been an ornament, but it also could have been part of a fishing apparatus. Finally, we come to the beads, which are one of the most important reasons for my being at the site, was to study the different types of beads found here. Chlorite is the most common, carnelian, jasper, and shell and bone. We also have steatite and chlorite. And then obviously we have some historical modern glass. The chlorite is from different sources. We can tell visually. We haven't been able to identify the actual source of them. And some of the steatite is clearly not local because it's from a dolomite source that is not found in Oman. Most of the steatite beads have been fired and glazed, which is a technology that was also practiced at HD-6, which is a site further to the south along the coast. Some of the beads are drilled with special drilling techniques that I think can be linked to the Indus, though we do have local varieties of drilled steatite as well. And different types of steatite beads found here indicate that they're coming from different manufacturing areas, showing the different networks that people were involved in. Carnelian beads are also an important discovery at the site. Some of them have been heavily worn. This is an abrasion on the interior. Others have no wear, which indicates that they were not worn very long before they got lost. This is an example of a quartz bead, also with a pecked hole. And then beads drilled with stone drilling, which is very similar to Indus drilling, but this possibly may be it from the early Harappan period, and it could have been a bead that was curated over a long period of time. This bead is drilled from two sides, and we have we've been able to do laser ICP MS analysis at the Field Museum with Dr. Laura Disbio, and Randall Law helped with the charts here. We can identify the source of these carnelian by comparing with geological sources. So two of the beads are clearly from the Indus. This one was found on the surface in 1986. It's drilled with a different technique, and it's probably a Wadi Suk period bead. These beads are from the excavations, and they all source to Iran. So it indicates that the site was linked to Indus networks as well as Iranian networks, and that some beads here from the Indus may have actually been from the early Harappan that were then curated and used over hundreds of years before they eventually got to Oman. Finally, we have a Harappan category of weight, not the Harappan style of weight. This is in the shape that is locally made of local marble, but it corresponds to the Harappan category F. And this is a very important category, which many weights are found in the Indus. Most Harappan weights are rectangular or square, and some of them are truncated spheres. And this one falls kind of in a new category, so it's a new discovery, but it indicates that local people were using a Harappan equivalent weight system as part of their trading activities. So in conclusion, HD-1 was an important seasonal fishing and trading settlement. It was protected in a protected location for offloading and loading fishing catches, as well as goods that were being traded from and to the Indus. There also must be a large settlement nearby that still needs to be located, so we have not found the major settlement that would be linked to this site. The site needs to be protected and developed for tourism, and we could also do future GPR to find more outlines of the lagoon. So overall, I think it's really important to protect the site, and I hope that in the future we'll have a chance to continue working there. Thank you very much.